Welcome to the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. I'm Allie Rose, certified clinical hypnotherapist and subconscious success coach. I help my clients stop self-sabotage and feel safe to create more wealth, worth, and wellness from within. If you find yourself stuck repeating the same unhelpful patterns in your life, health, business, or relationships, even after all the mindset work, this podcast is for you. Each week, you'll hear deep dives into the hidden beliefs shaping your life and live hypno coaching sessions where someone shifts a block in real time. Because willpower isn't the problem, your subconscious story is. And when you shift it at the root, everything else begins to change. So let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. We're so excited to be back with you today, where we will be talking about the subconscious mind and burnout, something that I know that many people have experienced and are experiencing now. But before we dive in, Safiya, welcome back. Thank you for being here with me again today. How are you feeling about this conversation?
I'm feeling good about it. I feel like I say that every week, but I love our conversations, and burnout is something that I have thought about a lot. I've written about, I've even had experience in my life. So I'm really curious to dive in and see where we go with it. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. Me too.
And of course, my favorite thing, let's do some wordplay. How are we defining burnout? And particularly we'll talk a bit, I guess, about the relationship with the subconscious, but I think it's nice to think, like, what are we actually talking about when we talk about burnout?
Yeah, so as I think about it, or as I was thinking about it, burnout to me is what happens when you live in misalignment for too long. So I would say on the surface, it looks like exhaustion, lack of motivation, feeling numb or irritated all the time. But as I'm always looking for like the deeper level of things, knowing that there's like a root cause of something, I really believe it's your subconscious mind and your body kind of protesting, your subconscious saying, this life that you're living is not matching who you actually are anymore. It may have been at one point, but it's not matching who you actually are anymore. So that's how
Mm.
I would define burnout. And I know that it's a bit different than maybe how someone else might define it.
I love that definition. What I'm curious about is we talked about the body and the subconscious kind of sending you a message that, like, you are not in alignment with that sort of true self. But I know that we've talked a lot about how the subconscious drives our behaviors. So it almost feels like there's a little internal battle going on there as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Okay. So this is the really interesting thing is I think that burnout, it can sometimes come from a place of you've outgrown old survival patterns. They're no longer working for you anymore. And so burnout is a way of saying, hey, ding, 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 take a look at me, like, sounding the alarm, take a look at me and get more into alignment with the person that you are now versus the person who created the patterns in your life that worked for you at some point. So I don't even know. I think that answered your question.
Oh, it answered it. It really did answer it because I think that kind of speaks to my curiosity around the idea that it is also those patterns are also created in the subconscious, right? So then it does kind of almost become a tension because you've originally created those patterns in the subconscious, but they're no longer serving the person who you are, the life that you have. And so you would get exhausted, you would get tired. It is the subconscious sending a message in a way of, like, there's a mismatch here. There's a mismatch between these things that we've created and the life that you're living. And it could be that, as you said, it could be that you've outgrown it, or it could be that you've, taken on a bunch of stuff that you probably need to let go of, right?
Right. Yeah, because sometimes we take on, and so as I've shared in past episodes, I think that the mind's entire job, the brain's entire job is to keep us alive. And so sometimes we take on things from a place of safety and survival. Those are top tier in our mind at all times. And so taking on those things for a period of time might be the highest priority because you need safety and survival. But then maybe once you reach a place where you're doing those things for too long, it becomes then almost a threat to your safety and survival to do those things for too long. It's
Mm.
because you've maxed out right at that level. And so you need to kind of up level or go to a different level, and you need to look at, like, is this actually in alignment long term for who I am as a person or who I want to be?
Yeah. That's such a great way of putting it. I love it. You talked about those patterns around safety and survival. Are there any other sort of deeper subconscious patterns that you think can lead to burnout over time?
Yeah, I think that one of the most common, and this runs rampant, I was going to say in the US, but I think that it's for the majority of the world, is that the belief that your worth comes from what you do and what you produce versus who you are, right? Because that leads to constantly people pleasing, proving, achieving, producing, never resting, right?
Mm.
And this deep subconscious need to be good or to be liked or to avoid disappointing anyone. So you end up saying yes when you want to say no, or showing up for things that drain you, and tolerating roles, rules, or routines that no longer feel right for you. So, or a pattern of staying in places, jobs, relationships, habits that you've outgrown simply because it's familiar, because a part of you believes that leaving would mean failing or that leaving would be unsafe. So, all of that over time, proving, pushing, forcing, people pleasing, all of that builds toward burnout, right?
That definitely makes sense. So I'm curious then why burnout tends to show up in people who look like they have it all together, maybe even high achievers, that type of thing, because I feel like that is where I see it the most, right?
Yeah, I think that those are, if they were being honest, if we're being honest, those are the people who have the hardest time stopping, right? Oftentimes, they've built an identity around being the reliable one or the successful one or the one who can juggle it all. So, on the outside, everything can look polished and put together. But what I often see is that behind the scenes, there's the sense of disconnection from self, from purpose, from joy. So, they're checking all of those boxes, but the boxes aren't theirs. And burnout really sneaks in when you've created a life that looks good on the outside, but it doesn't feel good on the inside. And it's really hard to walk away from something or to do something different when everyone else is praising you for it.
And also, we all have our own internal metrics of success, right? I can think of a particular friend who has gone through some burnout over the last couple of years. And, you know, I think there are societal pressures around that person in terms of being praised for certain things. But I think their identity also became wrapped up in being the person who is reliable and all of that as well. That's what I was thinking of when I was thinking of that inner struggle. Because if you feel like, as you said, your worth is kind of attached to your work and your output in the world, then you know, even pulling away from that is going to feel like an internal struggle, even if your body is telling you you need to slow down. So I definitely can see how that would sort of almost be something that really can be seen in people who are high achievers, and who they have it all together.
Mhm.
But what is the body trying, or the subconscious, the body, what is the message that it's trying to give that person? What is burnout trying to tell you or tell whoever is experiencing it?
I think it's I think it's a I think it starts out as a quiet no, but then I think it goes into being a loud no from a part of you that has been trying to give you a wake up call. It's your body, it's your subconscious saying you've drifted too far from yourself, or like that something has just run its course, that there's a version of your life, of success, a role that you've been playing, like that's no longer aligned, right? It's not so much of burnout gets tied to rest. And I think that it's yes, rest can be a part of it, but it's not just about needing more rest. I would say it's actually about needing more truth. It's a moment that if you stop and listen closely, it's not just saying stop everything. It's saying stop. There's a different way that you can be doing this.
Yeah. So I went to a singing class yesterday
Mm.
and I met a number of people there. And there was a young lady there who was actually telling us quite openly that she'd experienced burnout the year before. And we kind of asked her, like, what she'd made a lot of changes in her life. We were like, how on earth did you do that? Because, one of the things you said earlier is you kind of become disconnected if all of your sort of focus goes into your career and producing and all of that. It's like you can get disconnected from the things that you might just do for fun and the things that may fill you back up. She said something which I love so much that I'm totally gonna do it. She made a list of things that she'd always thought, when you see something and you think, "Oh, that looks interesting." And she just made a list of all those things, and then she's trying to do some of those things. And I love that. I love that sort of idea of tapping into your own curiosity and instead of just ignoring it because it may look interesting, but like, is it gonna help me climb this ladder or whatever? No, and just being like, oh, that looks interesting. I'm gonna write it down and then using that sort of to guide her. So I thought that was a really interesting story and that somehow just popped into my mind when you said
Yeah.
that. And, I think it was a really great way for her to kind of tap back into that piece of herself. So I'm curious about what are some tips or tools that you think or you recommend for people who are dealing with burnout, that they can do when they're in it.
I think the first step, I think it's about more truth. So I think the first step is honesty. You have to stop. I'm going to use a word that's thrown around. You have to stop gaslighting yourself about how tired or unfulfilled you actually are. And then I think you have to simplify. Like, this is not the time for a 17-step morning routine. Like, this is the time to strip things back to what actually nourishes you. Even just one aligned yes, like you said, that woman writing down a list of things that maybe she's always wanted to try. So one aligned yes or one brave no to something that you know is no longer fulfilling you can start to shift the tide, right? So tools, obviously, I'm always going to say that hypnosis and hypnotherapy can help with that because there's a lot of honesty within my sessions with clients. Clients say things that they would never say when they were in their conscious mind. Whenever we are working at things from a subconscious level, I think breath work, getting back, helping the nervous system feel safe. And I do believe that journaling can help you access the deeper beliefs driving the burnout and then rewire them.
Okay. We're gonna have to have a long chat about journaling one day, Ellie.
Right. I know.
Oh. But I love that. I love those tools that you use with your clients and maybe even yourself. I love that those ideas of things that you can do that are both physical, like the breath work, and also introspective. And I love that idea of truth.
Mhm.
I think, when you talk about that misalignment, um, it's almost like you're not aligned with things that are true to you, right? So I love the idea of getting into more truth. I'm assuming you've worked with clients who have been burnt out in hypnotherapy. What is it that usually brings those people to you? Because I know you sometimes say hypnotherapy is usually a person's last resort, but I'm curious what's usually showing up for those people when they sort of come for hypnotherapy.
Yeah, I don't think that people honestly come to me saying that they're burnt out. However, I think that what it can show up as is it's the same thing to me as when someone keeps says that they're running into the same wall over and over again. I mean, there's a reason why you're running into the same wall over and over again. And oftentimes that can be because what you're doing is out of alignment with what you deeply want to be doing. People will say that it's confidence issues or that it's procrastination or that it's money blocks. Those are often things I think that are related to burnout, but they don't come in often saying that they're burnt out. But what we uncover during a session is that something within them that's deeper within them is out of alignment with what they're doing now or with what they're consciously saying that they want to do. And we just need to get them, back into alignment. And it's interesting. I'm thinking about, let's see, by the time that this episode is released, if you go back to the coaching episode right before this one, Angelique talks. I'm trying to even think if I included it as part of the coaching, but really what she said during that session was I asked her, "How was that for you?" And she said, "This was the first time that my mind has taken a break from thinking about work in a really long time."
Mm.
And and I think that she was burnt out from thinking about her business in the way that she had been thinking about it. And I think that that was a really big shift for her. I always check in with the people who do podcast coaching calls a couple of days and then a couple of weeks after they have their calls with me. And, she has experienced, like, since that session, massive shifts. But I think it's because we were able to press pause on the pattern that was running, the pattern that was telling her that she constantly needed to be thinking about work like 24/7. And we were able to go to the deeper issue. And so now she feels re energized around her work in a different way.
Oh, I love that. And what it reminds me of, because what when you said that, what kind of occurred to me is I think sometimes there can almost be a work culture that can kind of not lead to burnout, but almost like keep that pattern running. There's one of the things that happened when I moved into this job was that I felt like work was defined by whether you were in a meeting or in front of student. Like, there were these very fixed ways of defining what work was. So if you're at work for 8 hours a day or how many ever hours, it's like the only way that work looks is if you are in front of a computer or doing this particular thing or whatever the case may be. Whereas I feel like I wanted to be a bit creative in some of the aspects of the work I was doing. And I feel like creativity needs space. But the culture was very much of a culture of busyness, right? And I think that can happen in a lot of places. And it can kind of almost stop you from realizing you are burnt out because you feel like this is what you have to do to fit in with the sort of culture around you. And I think that's true even in the entrepreneurial space, right? Like, the ideas around what working looks like and what busyness looks like can almost you can find it hard to see what's kind of leading to that burnout. So I love the idea of being able to take a break from those patterns and kind of looking honest, being able to take an honest look, almost taking a bit of space from it, stepping away from it, and having that honest look.
Right.
So yeah, I
Yeah,
example.
I agree with you. And I think honestly, so much within the online coaching, service provider, whatever we want to call it, that space, I think burnout runs rampant. And I think it's not something that some people do openly talk about it. But I think that sometimes there's a pressure to not talk about it. And I think that it's I think that it's just more prevalent because I think we're constantly being told like, "Oh, we need to show up at all times, be top of mind for our clients at all times." And so I think that that can lead to burnout. I think there's a lot of I think comparison within the online space can lead to a lot of burnout as well because you're constantly comparing like what you're doing to what someone else is doing and then maybe trying to fit yourself into that's the way that so and so is doing it, so that's the way that I need to be doing it, and that can lead to burnout as well.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you think burnout itself can become a pattern? Like, I think about people who kind of like people who I know who leave corporate because they're burnt out, they start their own business, and then all of a sudden they're back in that cycle again. Do you feel like burnout itself can almost become a pattern?
Absolutely. As with anything else, because I think here's what happens, and I'm going to be very honest. I am looking at my life now, just as we're having this conversation here.
Mm.
And, I got my master's in social work and I was working in the social services field. And, people who are social workers, I mean, it's not for the faint of heart. This is no longer the case for me because I've moved into a different sphere of this field. But we're often underpaid and overworked, and we're working a lot of times with the most vulnerable populations within our society. And there were I'm thinking about definitely 2 times that I can recall where I had been pushed to capacity and, I quit my jobs and I retreated and I rested and I did something, that was completely out of the social work field. But I think the reason why it can become a pattern is when you don't get to the root of why you were burnt out in the first place. And when I look back at those moments in my life, I really can see that I had fallen into people pleasing tendencies and I had fallen into being praised for being a helper. I think that that's part of it, and lack of boundaries. When you're working in a social service agency, sometimes there's such a lack of boundaries, and you almost feel like you have to be giving every single part of yourself to your clients. And overworking is praised. And I think it has to do with identity. This can happen with people in corporate world too, is that when your identity is too tied to your work, I think you lose yourself in burnout, and I think that that's one of the reasons why you can burn out is because you don't know who you are outside of that role.
Mm.
So,
One of the things that popped into my mind just now when you spoke about that, and this is something the first time I ever heard about burnout, it was associated with what's called compassion fatigue. And it was really within the healthcare space. And that was the first time I'd ever even heard the terms burnout and also the term compassion fatigue. And when you talk just now about being a social worker and the relationship of your work around things like setting boundaries and everything, what do you think is the relationship there between burning out and almost, compassion fatigue to me always conjures up this images of like serving until you're like exhausted, right? So do you feel like you talked about having those boundaries?
mhm.
I think that's a big piece of kind of protecting yourself against burnout, especially if you are in a space where you maybe have some sort of role where you are holding that compassionate space.
Really, the turning point for me was recognizing, one, that if I don't take care of myself, then I can't help anybody in any capacity at all. So, I need to take care of myself. And I think that one of the bigger things is recognizing, at least for the way that had been working then, is that I am not anyone's savior. My job is not to save someone's life. My job is to be present with the person that I'm present with for the allotted period of time that we are to be together. When I am with you in our sessions, I am with you. But when you step off the screen and I step off the screen, me carrying all of what you've shared with me, holding on to your stuff for a longer period of time than the time that we're together, it doesn't do anything for anyone. It doesn't do anything for me because it just keeps me in the cycle of being attached to you energetically without actually being able to do anything about that. And it also kind of makes it seem like you don't have your own autonomy and your own self determination and capacity to be able to help and support yourself. And I know not everyone shares this view, but I believe in a higher power. And I
Mhm.
believe that there is some force of greater good and love working in everyone's life. And that is not my role to take on. That when you step off of my screen, I'm handing you over to the divine in some ways. And that force of love has a greater impact in your life than what I ever could. So a lot of that for me was about letting go of the need of being needed, of setting boundaries, of recognizing that caring for myself better means that I can actually show up and care for you better.
Yeah. And I feel like that relates back to what you said earlier about truth, right? You were kind of taking back your own truth of what you believe about yourself, what you believe about the world, and kind of allowing that to be true in your life and set boundaries from that place,
Right.
not from a place of what I think sometimes what makes people not want to set boundaries is because it feels like it can be selfish. If you're setting those boundaries from a place of truth, then I think that's always going to have a different result. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reality is that I believe that people at their core are resilient and capable. And I think that that goes back to if I'm holding so strongly to your stuff and feeling like it's my responsibility to fix or change something, then that is I'm communicating to you that I don't trust you with your own healing in some way. And I do fully believe in people's innate capacity to heal themselves and to be in relationship with me, yes, to help that healing along, but ultimately at the end of the day, I do believe that people have the capacity to do their own work, and why would I wanna take that from you, right?
Yeah, I definitely get that. So then to go back to what we were talking about, that repetitive burnout cycle, what do you think? I feel like you said it so well about the truth and about the truth of your own beliefs. So what do you think are some steps that a person can take to step out of that burnout cycle, that repeated burnout cycle? Where do you think they could start there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there does need to be a pause. There needs to be a moment where you press pause, you press stop, um, and you take an honest look at your life. You have to stop making like alignment being the reward for achieving, start making it like a requirement for how you operate. And maybe you need to redefine what success means to you in this moment, not what your parents taught you, not what Instagram says it is, but actually what feels good and energizing for you in your body. And I think it also means healing those deep parts of you that equates rest with laziness or slowing down with not being safe or with failure, right? When you build your life back from a place that's aligned, where your actions match your values, your energy, your actual desires, you don't have to recover from it all the time, right? You're no longer surviving your life, you're actually living your life. So, really, I think it starts with pausing. Question that I'll ask my clients is make a list of everything that drains you that's not working, but also make a list of everything that is working. Do more of the things that are working, right? And take a look at if you can't make, because I understand that everybody can't quit their jobs. I get that, right? But is there wiggle room within the current space that you're in to start to shift it that to something that's more aligned? What would be maybe one small shift that could make this more into alignment with who I am as a person?
That's great. I'm reminded I always laugh when I think about this because sometimes I can't believe I did it. Years ago, I wrote this book about well-being, and I wrote it because of my own burnout, and
Right.
I'd actually forgotten about that until we started this conversation. One of the things I talked about in there, it was specifically well-being for dentists because I'm in the dental field. But one of the things we just talked about scheduling, and I'd spoken to so many people who'd gotten so creative with their schedules
Right.
that to really bring them a bit more relief, right? For some people, it was having spaces. For some people, it was how what they scheduled, right? I met somebody who she was like, I prefer to not switch tasks. So I'm only going to do certain things on a Monday morning and certain things on a Tuesday afternoon. And her clients absolutely adjusted. Like there was a bit of a, and then it was fine, right? And actually, the reason I wrote the whole book was exactly for that because I'm like, there are going to be a lot of people out there who aren't going to quit their jobs, and here's some ideas for things that you might do to kind of change things up. I totally forgot about that. That's so funny. But that's a good reminder that we can do things differently. And I tell you one thing that I felt like really shook up at least the people I could see in my field and how they worked was COVID. Like we were 100% convinced that things had to be done in a certain way, and suddenly we couldn't do it in that way. And now it's like, oh wow, we can do we can do different things. So as hard and terrible as that time was, I think it gave people a bit of that space that you were talking about, that pause to rethink how they might be working and kind of match it to the way things were. And a lot of people haven't gone back. They haven't gone back from that, and it's working just fine. So I love that idea of pausing and taking that space and thinking about what you might be able to do differently.
Yes,
So yeah,
absolutely. Wonderful.
yeah,
I
this is a great conversation.
Yeah, yeah, I realized as we went through how much more passionate I am about this idea of burnout and also maybe how many more times I've experienced it and what I've learned from those experiences. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, for anyone who's experiencing burnout, I would say there's a deeper root issue that's going on there.
Mm,
There's a deeper story that is propelling you toward burnout. There's a reason why you feel like you must keep going, going, going. I called mine the more monster that lived within me that constantly told me that I needed to do more, be more, and realizing that I was putting more onto my plate when nobody else was asking me to put more on my plate, right? And so I would just to encourage anyone that's listening and they're like, "Yes, I'm burnt out." It's pausing, right? As I said, it's looking at, is there a 1-degree shift that I can make that might help me live more in alignment or be more in my values? But I think that the deeper work is in recognizing what's the underlying story that I'm telling about myself, the world, other people, the way that I need to work that is propelling you to live in the cycle of burnout. So, yeah.
mm, yeah. And then you shift your story, you
And
change
then
your
you
life.
take your life.
Absolutely. I love it. I absolutely love it. This has been such a great conversation. I always leave our conversations buzzing with ideas and I hope the same is true for our listeners. Yeah, this has been great.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for just helping the conversation be even more deep and thoughtful. And as I said, if you recognize that you're struggling, you want to start to shift that story at the root, head to shiftyourstorypodcast.com or click the link in the show notes to schedule your connection call. I would absolutely love to chat with you about that and see if I could support you. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're sending you so much love and gratitude. Until next time, bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to send me a message on social media. I'm at the Ali Rose on both Facebook and Instagram. And if you want to be coached on a future episode or explore what it would look like to work with me one-on-one, head over to shiftyourstorypodcast.com. And if you never want to miss an episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review. It helps more people find this work. Until next time, keep shifting, keep growing, and most importantly, I want you to remember that your story isn't set in stone. You always have the power to shift it.